Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. Welcome to the Clutter Fairy Weekly for March 17th, 2020. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, coming to you from beautiful Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webcast that we do every week, podcast and webcast we do every week, talking about organizing tips and tricks and answering your questions, responding to your comments on all our channels. Thanks so much for coming with us today. I know everybody's at home with nothing to do, so they need to be watching videos on getting organized instead.
If you're joining us in the Zoom meeting for the first time, you can share your comments and questions via the chat, and I'll try to make sure Gayle addresses them before we move on to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature to let me know if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question yourself via audio or video. We normally try to stream the webcast live on Facebook, but Facebook isn't cooperating today. But if I get that up and running, anyone watching on Facebook can share questions and suggestions there, and I'll relay them to Gayle. And during the live webcast each Tuesday, you can also talk to us directly by calling 669-900-6833. Use meeting ID 993-419-863 to join the meeting. Okay, Gayle, let's get right to our featured topic because it's a lot of content, and that is piles to files, sorting paper to be ready for tax time.
We always have a whole lot to say about paper, and paper is everybody's general nemesis. Everybody has issues with paper. I think that there are some people that find sorting paper and putting it away entertaining, but I think that's a really small sliver. It's a very small population of people that find that entertaining, and the rest of us find it to be an irritating chore. So part of what we want to talk about today is how to do that with sort of the least amount of effort and not wasting time creating things that you don't need to create and getting rid of stuff that you don't need to keep and making that filing process as short and sweet as possible for you and still be able to manage and find the stuff that you need to find. So let's get some key concepts going here. The first one is the filing system should be proportional to the amount of energy and time and willpower you have available to work on it. So if you are somebody who finds filing really, really difficult, or you have a short attention span for it, or you find the whole process super annoying, you do not want to create an extra complicated filing system with a whole bunch of detailed pieces that will just make your filing that much harder and longer. So you also want to think about how much time you have to focus on it and how much energy you have at any point in time to focus on it. And if you have all the time in the world, then you can make your system as complicated as possible. But I suspect that most of us want to put as little attention to this project as possible and still be able to retrieve the things that you need to retrieve. And so part of the way that you do that is that you make a system that is less complicated and think in terms of big buckets. So subdividing your papers into the smallest practical number of categories that will get the job done, instead of, I always see people who, the example in my head is utility bills, and they make a file for the gas bill and a file for the phone bill and a file for the electric bill and a file for the internet bill and a file, they make files for everything by vendor, and yet they have no reason to look at that paper again unless something goes wrong, and they have no need of that paper for their tax return. And so they go to all this trouble to accumulate 6 different unique files worth of paper that they're then never going to use again. And so this is a perfect example of, you want categories that are large and easy to file. If you have to find something, you can get into it. But if you don't have to find something, you don't have to spend a whole bunch of time separating out 6 different things and making 6 different visits to the file cabinet. You can do it in one big bucket. So that would be, here's the utilities 2020 bit file, and it's one file in which you put every utility. And every month, you're going to have a new stack of utility bills, and they're all going to go in together. And then the next month, there'll be the next ones in front. And so at this point, unless you need those utility bills for some kind of deduction on your tax return, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Generally, you're keeping those bills in case there's some kind of problem, in case you have to, gee, what happened? Look, my water bill spiked. That must mean I have a leak. I have to go, and did they ever give me credit? And yada, yada. There may be some interaction with the company that you have to deal with troubleshooting problems. But generally, you get a bill, you agree the bill's reasonable, you pay the bill, you get another bill, and you see the payment got posted, and you're done. Like, your business with the utility company is complete. So because you don't really have to retrieve them very much, and because you can find it easily enough if you put it in a big bucket, taking all those utility bills every month and sticking them in one utility file is one file and one trip to the file cabinet, and you're done with 6 pieces of paper at once. So that's the example that I'm trying to make of, instead of spreading it out. Oh, I see the meeting is live on Facebook now. Hi, Facebook. Sorry, we had a little trouble getting it in to Facebook, but welcome. Hi. Well, you can circle back on YouTube and see the beginning again. Okay, so we're talking about bigger buckets of paper and filing in larger categories instead of a whole bunch of small ones. One of my favorite examples to this day was a client's mother who was in her 80s, and she was a little Alzheimer-y at this point. She was a little starting to have a little dementia, and she created a file that was labeled Cardboard 2010. And in that file of Cardboard 2010 was one piece of cardboard, and that to her was putting a file folder around something that she wanted to keep and labeling it. And it's an extreme example, but it is what we tend to do with paper. Somehow we think that if we put a file folder around the piece of paper and capture it, that's improving our life. And the truth is, you don't want to have an endless and ever expanding stack of file folders. You want some main categories that current stuff can go in and old stuff can come out of, and it's easier to file if there's less. And so you want to aim for those categories that are most useful in your life and big, like taxes 2020. So if you have a business, or if you are doing your own tax return at home, accumulating your tax papers for your accountant, this is another big category that everybody has to have. The tax accountant doesn't really need 15 files of paperwork from you. They just need the stuff that is applied to this year. And so you can have one file, and everything that's related to your taxes for 2020 can go into it. And at the end of the year, you've got one file to hand to the tax guy. I'm sure that there's people out there that will argue that their tax situation is more complicated, and that's possible. And so maybe you need to have a couple of files. But truthfully, you can order the things within that one file and still get everything in there and hand it away. And trying to find the 47 file folders that you set up for taxes is a lot more irritating than finding the one and sticking it all in there. And then if you have to pull it out and accumulate totals and do things anyway, you're going to sort the paperwork when you go to work on it and prepare your return. It's much easier to grab that one file out and then sort the paper at that point than it is to try to do it every month all along into all those different categories. Just my theory. Okay. The next concept is that if you have a filing backlog, so if you think of the idea that you have a bunch of piles of paper that haven't been addressed, if you have old file cabinets that have old paper in them that haven't been dealt with in a while, then you really have two projects here. So one of them is that you need a system in place to roll forward, essentially, to start handling what's incoming now, and so that it's easy for you to file the current stuff and sort of draw a big red line and say, this is current and I'm going to go forward currently with this kind of stuff. And then you sort of isolated, you quarantined your backlog project so that everything that's old is an older project that you're going to work on separately. And the way to tackle them is separate. And so preparing the files for how you want to roll forward gets a system in place that as things are happening, you can be putting them away in a new system, even as you are over working on the other system and trying to organize that and thin that. And so that process sort of helps you manage and stops the bleeding, as I would say, of the incoming mail and incoming paperwork, give you a way to manage it now so that it doesn't. Some people, if you don't do that, then you end up with a feeling of you're working on the backlog all the while it's growing bigger with the current stuff on the other end, and you feel like you never quite catch up. So we want to sort of separate your success with the current stuff and give them their own filing system so that when you're working on the backlog, it doesn't, you still know that you're managing it up front and you're keeping your current self in good shape, and that's important. Speaking of the old project, you know that old paper is much easier to thin. There's a lot less you like to keep, and so part of tackling that old project is going through and deciding, okay, now this stuff is 10 years old or 12 years old or 20 years old, and the utility bills from 1985 are really no longer important to me. They're not going to solve any problems for me. They don't, or it's not information I need to have. So it is a perfect place to thin out in big chunks. And I'm sure you've heard me say this about paper before. It's a great way to go and get a big win in a big hurry, to dive into an old file cabinet, to dive into some old files, flip through it and see if there's anything that is still remotely important to you. And I find that hard. I mean, from a day-to-day paper management point of view, the keepsakes that are in that paperwork will still be important probably, but the rest of the, you know, here's the old gas bill, it's not going to be important. And so it's a good place to thin the herd. It's a good way to make all of that go out quickly and create a shred pile, a recycle pile, a trash pile, and make it shrink in a hurry. So if you're feeling defeated, or you're not feeling energetic, you're not feeling like you can focus on a lot of decisions right now, then go to the old paperwork and pull that stuff out, because the decisions are so much easier. And you can get a big win in a hurry. You can pull out and go, oh, here's a whole file of my phone bills from 10 years ago, and I absolutely don't care about that, and the whole file can come out. And so you can make sort of a low-hanging fruit decisions when you're feeling low energy or low focus, and still make headway on the project. So not everybody needs to save everything. And if you have a complicated tax return, you might be using a Schedule A for itemized deductions. You might be using a Schedule E for self-employment. You may be doing a Schedule B with a whole bunch of royalties. If you are using, I'm speaking in United States tax code, sorry. But basically, you know, if you're employed by a company and you get salary and you have some basic deductions that are kind of standard across generally everybody, and you don't have a whole lot else going on, then you're probably saving way more paper than you need. And so if your return is a little bit more complicated by running your own business and needing to keep up with that paperwork, and having a whole bunch of investment stuff, and even so, that the paperwork for that is you know, end of the year reporting, and that's the end. That's all you need for taxes. The deductions, even in the United States, the deductions are getting less and less. There's less and less that you can deduct, and because they keep making the standard deduction bigger, and there's not as much to track as there used to be. People used to madly track their medical expenses because they were going to deduct medical expenses, except that the threshold is super high. And so unless you have a catastrophic illness, a whole bunch of hospital stays, you're out of pocket a huge amount of money. If you're on Medicare, you're not out of pocket a whole bunch of money. So even though you may be going to a lot of doctor's offices, you're not spending a bunch of money out of pocket. So you don't have that much to deduct. So there are deductions that we used to save a lot of paper for. Charitable deductions, the rules have changed about that. So we have been saving paper for a long time that we now don't need to. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you should find out exactly what's on your return, and if you don't prepare it, if you give your stuff to an accountant and let him prepare it, then it's time to go have an hour meeting with him and pay for an hour of his time or her time, and go have a conversation with what are you actually, explain to me what's on return, what kinds of things are you actually, what numbers are you using, what things are actually being deducted. I've been giving you this paper, do you care? So maybe you've been doing all this work to give them medical bills, and you haven't been able to deduct medical bills for the last 15 years, and you didn't realize that. So find out what exactly is standard and typical for you, and let those answers drive the kind of paper that you keep. So if you don't have to deduct medical bills, then keeping up with all those medical payments beyond the current year, while you're making sure the insurance has paid everything and making sure that the doctors all got paid and you're all square with everybody, like while it's happening, you want to make sure that you keep up with the bills so that you make sure everybody gets paid. But then after that, last year's medical bills, not so much. It's not as important if you're not actually able to deduct them at the end of the year. So the medical records, in terms of here's the lab results, here's the reports from the doctors, here's the diagnostic report, here's the x-ray report, those kinds of things you may want to keep as a lifetime medical history. But you can maybe let all the old medical bills go away. It's an example of one of the categories that we've been chasing it down and making separate files by doctors and labs and keeping all that stuff separate and organized in a million piles. And except that we can stop now and go, yeah, but why? Why do we care? Maybe the bigger bucket.
Gayle, we've lost your sound. Or maybe it's me.
She's waving. Can you guys not hear me?
We lost your sound for just a moment.
Okay,
it's back now.
Okay, good. Medical. So maybe instead of medical deductions, you want to focus on your medical history. And so maybe that's something that you keep by procedure. I was in the hospital for a knee replacement, and so everything related to the knee replacement goes in one file. I was in the hospital. I was being treated for the flu that lasted for 3 weeks, and so I'm going to have all the records related to that. It might be easier that way. Then you don't have to keep it all by doctor. And if you're well, that means that you basically have a medical file, and I go for my checkup, and I go for I got a cold and flu, and you basically keep the 2 or 3 times you saw the doctor this year in one file for 2020, and you're done. So depending on your health and what kinds of things you're going through right now, you can have as little as one file for medical, or as many as, however many procedures and stays that you have in a year. And it might be easier for you to retrieve the data that way. And if you've completely unhooked the medical stuff from taxes at this point, then it's really, I need to find out when I had that knee surgery. I'm seeing a new doctor, and I got to find out what the old doctor said about XYZ. And so you can go back and find those records again if you have to tell somebody in the future. Does that make sense? It's one of the things that creates big piles of paper in your life. I see a little note that says, how long do you keep an x-ray? So at some point, I think x-rays become keepsakes, because I think it's fun to look at the x-ray and see here's your bone showing up or whatever. It depends on whether the x-ray is about, so here you broke your arm and they fixed it and now you're mended. And so from that standpoint, I think then the x-ray isn't as important, other than it's entertaining to look at the break. So then it becomes a keepsake. But if you have a chronic condition And the x-ray is part of the way that you establish your condition 10 years ago and you're tracking the progression of an illness or something.
Or you're seeing lots of different specialists.
Yeah. And so they want to see what did it start out like, where you are now for comparison purposes. The only caveat there is if you're seeing the same doctor over and over again, they're going to have those records and it's not a problem. But if you end up having to go amongst other doctors, or because of your insurance, you're trading doctors a lot, then the x-rays that establish sort of baseline, this is my starting point before I got ill or at the beginning of the illness, so that they can compare and contrast as you go along. That's just interesting data for them. I don't know how it affects what they do. I'm not a doctor, but you will occasionally get requests for here's the baseline, here's what my baseline looked like, right?
The answer probably depends.
It's just fun.
Probably depends on how advanced a healthcare system your country has.
That too. And, nowadays there are digital copies of all of these things out there. And so, and the doctors are all required to keep those records for a long time. And they all have their own data management process to keep those records available. And so, in theory, if you needed to have an x-ray that you got rid of, you should be able to, in this day and age, you should be able to go back to the originating doctor and say, hi, can I get a copy of that x-ray? And they could give you a digital file. And so, while that wasn't true when I was in my 20s, it's certainly true now. And so we have a whole lot better ability to recover than we used to about, hey, I need that x-ray. Okay, let me go to the doctor and he'll send you a copy. Like we can make that happen without having it in our physical possession. Okay. That is about, not everybody needs to say anything. So most of us have three main categories of paper, and they are, the keepsake is the big one, right? So everything that we want to support our memory, document our history, photos, programs, kids' artwork, all the stuff that you have that is really the only reason you're keeping it is because it reminds you of your life, it reminds you of your family's life, and it's important to you from that standpoint. Keepsakes clog up the works in terms of managing your regular daily functioning paperwork, and so keepsake is always a paperwork category that you want to get out of the main flow and isolate it in its own boxes. So even if you don't have time to sort, you may look at all the photos and go, oh my gosh, I got to go through that stuff. Great, but you don't have to find sort it now in terms of managing a paper project. If you just get boxes of that you mark keepsake and you put everything that looks like a keepsake in there, then you can go back through keepsake boxes later after you've gotten the rest of your paper sort of under control. When you have the time and space, like now, you can see everybody's stuck at home, you can be going through boxes of keepsakes and filtering, labeling, sorting them, making notes, all the things you want to do with the keepsakes to explain these pieces of paper to the people that are going to come behind you. And so isolating keepsakes out of the main paper traffic flow is important because it's usually, depending on how sentimental you are, it may be a really high volume of paper that is obscuring the stuff that you have to run your daily life. So make one big bucket, call it keepsake, mementos, whatever, what have you, and pull all of those keepsakes out of your paper pile, and then come back to them as a separate project when you're ready and finished with the other stuff. The second kind of information, main categories of paper that we keep, is information that we want to hold on to, like recipes we want to try, articles we want to read. Here's a flyer about this company. Here's an advertisement about a product I want to buy. Here's business cards from, these people I met. We all have our own focused pieces of paper that is sort of our own internal database that we're creating of paper. Information that we want to keep up with that we don't know where to put, we don't know what to do with, but it is a pile of paper that we think that we want to touch again. So again, that's usually stuff that is going to get in the way of managing your day-to-day paperwork, like where's my passport, where's my phone bill, right? So this is another collection of paper that I'm saving this paper because it has information that I care about. And you could make a bucket of information paper and throw that stuff in there to be sorted later as well. And get you down to the documents that you need to have to put your hands on. This is the third category, main category paper, which is those documents that help you run your life, right? And so the bills and the bills that need to be paid, and then once they're paid, the bills that need to be kept track of, receipts, personal records like birth certificates, divorce decrees, school immunization records for the kids, that kind of stuff that you have to go, somebody says, give me a copy of your tax returns. You want to keep up with the tax returns, insurance documents. You always got to be able to put your hands on the insurance document in case something goes wrong, right? You wreck the car, the house floods, whatever, you got to have access to those insurance documents. So there's a certain amount of documents to manage your life, and those are the ones that you need to start with, pay attention to, make the file system that works for you. I tend to sort within file cabinet. I'm just going to talk about filing a little bit because the default solution is alphabetical. So you give a file a name and then you make them alphabetical, and then you can't remember what you named the file, and then you can't find the file because you don't remember what you named it. So I tend to separate them in big chunks in the file cabinet, like here's my vital records, and that's basically one that's got my grab and go file that has, here's the passports, here's the old driver's license, here's the voting card, here's the, all those important legal documents and things that are necessary to establish your legal presence on the planet. And that's all in one thing. But then I have, here's stuff related to the house, here's stuff related to the car, here's stuff related to the pets. For me, the pets are the kids. So you would have a kid, here's stuff related to the family, right? And so I have some big sections. And so when I know I need something about the house, I'm going to go to the house section, and then I'm going to have a few files in the house section. Here's the insurance, here's the repairs collection, here, that kind of stuff. And so you're going to have, you're going to be able to pick a big category of, it's about the house, I'm going to go look at the house files, and then you have less files to find. I find that functions better than just having 50 files that are in alphabetical order, because then I have to remember what I called it to find out whether it's I in insurance or H in home insurance or G for Geico. So it's a little, it's just an adaptation for you to have a second layer of broad buckets, I guess is the way to think about it. I can talk about paper forever. So I really want to find out if anybody has any questions about paper before. Do you have a particular type of paper that you don't know what to do with? Is there a category that is particularly vexing or difficult? Anything like that? Is anybody wanting to ask that question? Come online and talk to us.
Gayle, can you speak to, does the availability of electronic versions of documents change the advice you give?
So it used to be that paper was king. I remember the time, Ed and I remember the time. A lot of our audience remembers the time before computers existed and before the internet existed, and paper was the legal trail of what was going on. And so we kept a whole lot of documents against, I have to prove that this loan is paid off. I have to prove that this credit card got paid last month. I have to prove that, and you did it with paper. And now everything is super, super digital, and everybody's keeping electronic records, and it is a whole lot easier because we don't have to keep all those paperwork to prove everything. There is an electronic record that we can go look up and see. And so it has made our paper retention easier. And for those of us that remember paper was king back in the day. We trust the digital record a little bit less, and we find it a little bit more disturbing to think about it being electronic and being the only choice. And so I would experiment with things. If you're finding a reluctance to let go of the digital version and trust that the electronic version is accessible.
You let go of the paper version.
The paper, oh yeah, let go of the paper version and trust that the electronic is accessible. Then I would start with something that you don't feel super at risk about, like let's throw out the electric bills and see what happens. I mean, sort of test your level of anxiety by throwing out something that isn't as distressing if you lose it and have to go back and have it reprinted. One that comes to mind is bank statements. Everybody can get access to bank records now, and they don't always keep them. They don't keep your whole history live online, but you can
request.
You can request the ones that they don't keep live online anymore. And so if that makes you nervous, don't start with bank statements, start with something else. Here's the gas bill, here's the AT&T bill.
A credit card that you use only for personal stuff that never has a
deductions on
tax
it.
implication.
It's not a big deal other than, oh, here you bought your refrigerator on it, and you can keep the evidence of the purchase of something that cost you a bunch of money. But otherwise, the credit card that you go to the grocery store and the Target with, you can get the bill, agree that the bill's correct, pay the bill, and file it. And next month, when you get a new bill, you can put the new bill in and take the old bill out and shred it and see how that feels. Some of it is just, exposure and change in behavior and practicing that change in behavior. And if you can do that, it might make it easier. Yes, it's difficult to trust, but.
I want to share a comment from Bonnie.
Okay.
Bonnie said, paper's the bane of my existence. We hear that a lot.
Right.
I had a 5-drawer filing cabinet, which I got rid of a year ago, put all the files in tubs, and now going through and purging those. Realizing that what I needed or thought I needed 10 to 15 years ago is a lot different than today. Timely topic. This year I started with a folder for each month, putting all those statements, etc., in the month that it was received paid. Then next year I can shred that folder content and reuse the folder, purging as I go. Obviously, important documents are filed separately.
There you go. And that's the kind of current rolling system that makes it easier for you to manage your paper going forward. I think sounds like you're doing great. So I guess the next question for me is, how does that feel? Are you adjusting to it? Does it feel like it's working for you? And if it does, then woohoo, I'm excited. Let me know if there's some part of that you feel nervous about.
And Petra said, I sometimes feel the digital records are better in order than what I would do.
Right. Yeah. So if you think about a company, anybody that is selling you any kind of product or service, they have a vested interest in keeping up with all kinds of records because they are creating their own accounting data for their business. And so they're likely to have a whole lot more information than you would keep anyway. And, they have a vested interest in keeping up with it. And so it's not, if you work with a small business, that might not be true, but most of the people that you interact with around your house are people that truly have a vested interest in keeping your records straight and keeping up with what's going on for a whole bunch of regulatory reasons and reporting reasons and reporting to their stockholders, and all those people have to be made happy. And so, their ability to file and manage data is much more sophisticated than yours. Totally true.
Bonnie replied, it feels wonderful, an immense sense of relief. So that's her monthly system is working for her.
Well, and I'm sure as you go through those buckets that you made, you're finding that huge amounts of that paperwork, it ages, right? When it's current, it has a value in terms of what's going on with you right now. But, 5 years from now, it's no longer current. It's not affecting what's currently happening for you. And so it can go away. One of my favorite stories about dealing with paper was a woman who had been saving her electric bills because she was going to make a spreadsheet to find out how her cost was going, how she was doing in terms of the price that she was paying for her electric stuff. And I was like, so you're going to make this spreadsheet so that you can tell whether you did a good job in the past, like whether you got a good rate in the past or not? Yes, she wanted to make that spreadsheet. It was like, so what is that going to tell you, and how is that going to change the pricing that's available now or what you can get now? And there was no need for the data that she was trying to accumulate. And the reason that I pushed it was because she was feeling really guilty that she hadn't made the spreadsheet and done the analysis. And I'm like, who cares? The data that you're trying to generate in no way changes what is available in the market today or the choices that you're going to make today. Like, what you had to pay before really doesn't matter. You can't get the prices from 5 years ago, so it doesn't matter. You just have to choose from what's available right now. And so,
and that's sort of an extension of the principle that one of the first principles you stated, which is your filing system, and likewise the information that you are trying to capture and collect has to be proportional to the energy, time, and willpower you have available to deal with it.
Right. And she didn't have the time. Clearly, it was sitting there for 5 years and she'd never made this spreadsheet that she was trying to do. And she was feeling terrible about it. And so I finally, and it took a long time, but I finally convinced her to chuck that project, to chuck those electric bills and move on. And I think she was greatly relieved of the burden of guilt by doing it. And it saved her from a whole lot of paper that she just really, it just had no value at all. And it was a hard thing for her to adjust to. I think that there's a lot of people that by nature, they like data analysis, they like accumulating data, they like creating spreadsheets and looking at trends. And there's people out there, I'm thinking of engineers in particular, that really love the generation of data no matter what. But you have to decide whether it's data that's really worth your time and effort or not. And if it's not really worth your time and effort, spend your time on something that is. And so, yeah, I was super thrilled that I finally talked her out of, we shredded all the old bills and she was done forever. And it changed how she thought about it. And I was very excited for her because she was just so mad and upset with herself that she hadn't done this project. And every day that went by, she felt more and more bad about herself. And I'm like, this is so unnecessary. Let's let that go. And so it was super exciting when she finally was able to do that.
Judy said, where I find is my problem is if we're depending on the company or my computer for records, what happens if the computer crashes or the company goes out of business?
Well, that is a, issue. But I guess the question is, if the company goes out of business, it depends on what kind of service they're providing for you. So you have to ask that. Like, if the company goes out of business and they're providing you electric service, then it really doesn't matter what the old records were because somebody new is going to have to provide you with electric service and it won't matter. If it's a doctor's office that goes out of business, the doctor retires, something like that, yeah, it might be an issue. But then usually somebody who is aging out of their business will send a notice and say, hi, I'm going to retire at the end of the year. Here's the doctor that I sold my practice to, or here's the, it depends on what kind of choice they make about how they're going to transition or end their business. And so you have to evaluate whether that business that's going out of business has data that's really important for you going forward. And it may not. It may just feel like, oh my gosh, the records are going away. Now, the caveat of that is bank statements. So if I was in the age of consolidating banking companies, a lot of us sort of lost in the transition. The data didn't transition very well. Or you can't get old statements from prior years from companies that banks that no longer exist, that kind of stuff. So if you know, I think that's sort of slowed down now, but if you know that your bank is small, is regional, and has announced that they're going to be absorbed by somebody, I would go request any statements you think you're going to need, or go in and print out what you have available now, and save them in case. But really, the bank statements are only important in terms of supporting tax returns unless you have some other reason that you want to keep them. And so bank statements show there are third-party evidence to a taxing agency that this is the income that went into my bank account, this is the money that went out of the bank account. They can tell that you got money, they can tell where you spent money, and it helps you prove to them what your income level is and what your expenses were. And so as long as you are beyond the audit period of your taxing entity, then the fact that the bank is going out of business is not so important. If it's a current bank and you need those bank statements for this year or last year or the year before's tax return, yeah, I would go make sure you had printed out your copies before the company gets bought, gets closed, whatever, so that you have them. But you always have to filter with, okay, I know bank records in general are important, but is this a bank that I banked in 25 years ago and that my tax return is not going to get audited anymore? And there's nothing in those bank statements that I have to prove to anybody anymore. And so it may not be as important as you think. You just have to figure out what the intersection is of your life and whatever the business is closing, how current it is, how important it is in terms of your documentation. I'm not saying that very well, but I hope you get the point. I hope you see what I mean there.
We are out of time, and I did want to ask if you have any thoughts for everybody about this virus thing.
Oh my gosh. Oh, we hope that you are staying safe and well. We want all of our friends to be happy and well in their lives. So please take good care of yourself. We'll be here every Tuesday to give you some distractions so that you can come online and play with us. And in the meantime, think of this as the perfect time to be at home. You have to stay at home. You might as well be working on organizing your house. It's a perfect time to make stuff get processed and disappear. We know that you can, if you stay home, you'll stay safe, and you will hopefully be unexposed and happy to play with us again until they let us all out of our cages. And we will see you coming up next week at the same time.
Yeah.
Noon Central Time in the United States, whenever that is your time.
Yes. Noon Central in the United States is 1700 UTC, and
Okay.
I hope that people can calculate from that
what their actual time is right now.
what their local time is. If you're watching this on YouTube, we'd love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by going to cfhou.com/Facebook, and we will try. We'll hope that next week things are a little more back to normal and Facebook streaming works better than it did today. You can also subscribe to our mailing list by visiting cfhou.com/subscribe. We love to hear from our viewers and listeners, so please send us your questions and topic suggestions in the YouTube comments or any of the other channels where we can be found. And you can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
Da-da-da. And don't forget, if you guys are looking for some handy help while you're at home, I'm happy to schedule some virtual appointments with you so we can spend an hour together on FaceTime, and you can walk me around your house while you're trapped in it and not able to go to work anyway. For more about that, people can visit cfhou.com/virtual. All right, you guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.